Welcome to Field Foley episode 11. Today our guest is Mariana Lopez, a Latin American researcher and sound designer based in the UK. With a focus on sound design and accessibility, Mariana's expertise extends to acoustical heritage, historical soundscapes, and gender equality in audio. Her contributions to the field of sound design, including VR experiences, installations, and films, showcase her artistic and technical prowess. I am thrilled to explore Mariana's journey and insights into the world of sound design and acoustical heritage. So welcome, Mariana, and thanks for taking the time to talk with me.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so the first thing I'd like to ask you, could you briefly explain the term acoustical heritage?
Yes, of course. My definition of it is that it is the study of past cultures, but also current cultures as well, and current societies in relation to the acoustics of their environments. And here we could consider natural environments, built environments, indoor environments, outdoor environments. And this generally, these studies tend to focus on acoustic measurements on site or the use of computer models to recreate sites that no longer exist or that have changed throughout history. But also a lot of the work I do is a combination of acoustic engineering techniques, audio techniques, with considerations that come from the fields of sensory history and sensory anthropology.
That sounds like a whole can of worms that I'd like to get into because, recreating environments that are not like the same or not existent. How do you go about doing that? Do you go like from ancient texts and try to structure something like a 3D model or something and then make reflections out of there, or what? How can I imagine this?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I'll give you an example of a project I worked on to make it a little bit more tangible, ironically. So I've worked for a number of years on a cycle of medieval drama called the York Mystery Plays, which are basically a set of medieval plays that were performed in the city of York in the UK from the 14th to the 16th centuries. And the York Mystery Plays were performed outdoors in the streets of York. And each play was performed using a wagon that was pushed along the streets of York, followed a predetermined route, and stopped at predetermined street spaces to perform for an audience. And that audience could be standing audiences or watching for free, or it could be that audiences might have paid some money to have a seat in something like a scaffold. And when I was doing my PhD, and then after it also, I explored what the acoustic settings of this performances were, because we know that listening to what was being said was incredibly important to the productions and the text itself. And there's loads of cues in the text that the words listening was crucial, and Pamela King has done a lot of work in this field. So what I did is I did acoustic measurements of the best preserved site of the Mystery Place. That is a street called Stonegate in central York. By acoustic measurements, I mean we took a loudspeaker to the street and we placed a dummy head, a binaural dummy head, and an Avisonics mic. And what we basically do is we play a sine sweep through the loudspeaker and we re-record it to the microphones. So what you end up is with a recording of the sine sweep in that space. And generally, although this depends on the space you're exploring, we do several recordings changing the position of the loudspeaker and the position of the microphones. Once we've done this recording, what we do is a process called deconvolution. So we separate the original signal, so the sine sweep, from the response of the space to that signal. And we end up with what we call an impulse response. And it doesn't sound very exciting really, because it sounds a bit like a hand clap. But we can then take that impulse response, which will be one per each source receiver combination that you recorded. And you can learn loads about the space. You can learn speech intelligibility in the space, depending on the position. You can learn how clear speech might have been, again, but also how clear musical sounds might be. And things about listener envelopment and the apparent width of the sound source. So that's very exciting. But you can also listen to the space. So you can do a recording in an anechoic chamber, and then you can go and convolve it with that impulse response and hear that space. So that is mostly when the space exists and you can study it and measure it. In the case of the Mystery Place, of course, what I measured was the space as it is now. But as you may imagine, it has changed quite a lot since the 15th, 16th century. So what I then did is I built a number of computer models. So these are acoustic models. So they don't look very pretty, but they sound great. And what you generally do, this is what most people in acoustical heritage do, is they build a computer model of the space that they measured first. So exactly as it is when it was measured. And then what we generally do is we start changing the characteristics of the acoustic model to reflect what historical records tell us about that space. So for example, in the case of this specific street used for medieval drama, I changed the pavement. So from kind of a paved floor, kind of more irregular surfaces, but also looking into the characteristics of timber-framed houses in the period. So what you do then is you create those impulse responses out of those computer models. And the really exciting thing is that you can start exploring how the acoustic characteristics of the space changed as the space changed throughout history. Of course, we do make a lot of assumptions when we build the models. What I generally do is I build a number of models that reflect different possible scenarios, because it is often impossible to know exactly how a space like an outdoor space for medieval drama was used, because there is no particular records that give us enough information about its use. So we model loads of different scenarios, and we try to reflect on how those different acoustic settings might have had an impact on the performance.
Yeah, that sounds like quite a lot of work, and I'm aware of impulse responses and convolution reverbs, and I'm actually next week I'm driving up to Denmark for a work project, and on the way I found out that there's this really nice big oil tank where you can
I see.
record. It's like an abandoned oil tank. So this will be my first I would say like hopefully great impulse response recording, because I've played around a bit with it, but so far I have just like used claps or balloon popping and a simple recorder. But this time I'll try to bring something more involved, and we'll see how that goes. But that brings me to the next question. So if you're recording some outside impulse responses, how can you get rid of all the traffic noises, airplane noises? Do you like set a date and time, maybe 3 a.m. or something, to get something very clean? Or how do you do that?
Oh, that's a really good question. Recording impulse responses outdoors, as someone once told me, is probably one of the most difficult things that you can choose to do in audio. They told me that when I was already committed to it, so that they should have told me before. Yes, it is very hard. Noise levels. You need to have a really good signal to noise ratio for impulse responses to work. And when you're working in, for example, in the city centre of York, that is very popular, very touristic, it is a problem. And for example, when I explored that street, that is one of the most popular streets in York. So yes, we go very early. It's worth, if anybody's doing this work, just as a tip, do check the regulations of the city council or whatever space you're using. Because, for example, I remember when I did these measurements were done quite a long time ago now, but we had to check the regulations of the city centre, and there is a rule somewhere that says you cannot place a loudspeaker on the street before 8 in the morning. It's quite interesting, because it doesn't say you can't play sound, you just can't put a loudspeaker on the street. So we couldn't start before 8 in the morning. So what I generally suggest is to explore the space in advance. You can go with an SPL meter and just check what is the trend of noise levels or background noise levels in that area. But there's different ways in which you can work with the signals to actually get a better signal to noise ratio. So a tip for you is if you make the sine sweep longer, your signal to noise ratio is going to increase. So I think the signals in York City Centre in Stonegate were about 90 seconds, which is, it's very long.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, most people use about 15 seconds, so 90 is quite a lot, but it allows you to get a better signal to noise ratio. And there's quite a lot of research done on this. So that's what I did. But the added problem is that you have to sit really still for 90 seconds. And if you're like me, you know, it's almost an impossible task, really. But yeah, that's what we do. But, you know, there's always noise challenges with impulse responses. I worked on a project led by Dr. Lydia Alvarez Morales, and Lydia researched cathedrals in the UK. And although these are closed spaces, we had to be very careful about noise levels coming from outside of the building. And I remember once we had a really windy night, and we do those measurements when that space is close to the public.
Yeah.
But you know, even those external noises from outside of the building is something that you have to keep. I was going to say an eye out for, but maybe an ear out for.
Yeah, definitely. Like checking the weather report is also becoming part of my routine.
I imagine.
And I can also like relate to the having to sit still for 90 seconds. But I actually found out that it's, at least for me, it's a good way of learning to do that and to have almost those like mini meditations throughout the day, because when I go out recording and I have something very interesting, but I have to hold my microphone in a certain way because it's like over the water or something and I can't like put anything in there. I have this awkward pose and then I just try to go into my mind and meditate while recording and don't make any handling noises. So yeah, that's that's definitely the pain of working in audio. It's easier to make photographs because you can at least sneeze or something. But that's very interesting. I didn't know that that you used those long sweeps, but it totally makes sense to have a better signal to noise ratio that way. Very interesting information. So then for spaces where there isn't anything existing anymore, where you don't have like a street, maybe it's like an old building that's not there anymore. Mm-hmm. Do you all do that with? I would guess like with models, trying to recreate it somewhere virtually to get the structure there, and and the materials, or what's your process there?
Yeah, absolutely. You use specialized software that is for acoustic modeling, and you basically program the. That's how I do it. Different people do it differently, but how I've done it is literally enter the data on the space to that program directly, and you create the model of the structure. But as you say, you also assign characteristics to the surfaces. So you need to tell the system what is the absorption coefficient and the scattering coefficient of each material. This can be quite tricky in historical research because we might actually not know. And that's why we go through a calibration process. So what I was saying before, that you build first a model of the space that you measured, exactly as you measured it, that allows you to test the model. So what we do is we will change the characteristics of that data that we entered until it matches reality as close as possible. So we will check things like TR, so a measure of reverberation time, and we compare the reality with a virtual model. Mm-hmm. So that is a really important process because you need to know that your tools are doing the job before
of course,
before you start making claims about the past. You do need to make sure that you covered all your possible challenging moments. It is quite a laborious process, as you say, and sometimes you have to kind of modify the model several times until you get it right. But yes, as I said before, there is an amount of kind of choices that a researcher does when choosing, for example, absorption coefficients for a historical model.
I see, yeah. Yeah, I can imagine like that must be very hard. know that from, I think, like some history documentation or something, where they try to find out, okay, how did they make the bricks? How dense were they and stuff like that. That's something. Yeah, as you said, we don't have that information because I mean, even nowadays, I would say if you buy like an old house, maybe even from the 70s, there's a high chance that you don't know exactly what's in the walls and what kind of structure you have.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, all those documents are probably lost somewhere, and not many people care. I mean, you could at least record the space, but still, like we have a very old house, like the bottom floor is from the 1600s and the first floor is from the 1900s, and so the top floor is from the 90s. So we have like 3 different areas of age in our house, which is interesting. And you can see the different styles and the different. We have like sandstone in the bottom, like very thick walls, and and then the red bricks up top.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And it's also interesting that the acoustic properties are, of course, different. If I need to record something very silent, I ask my mother-in-law to use her like bathroom or something else, because it's those thick walls. It's very shielded from everything else. This is really interesting. That so many thoughts go into recreating acoustical spaces. So what other things do you have to consider when you're designing sound for like those historical soundscapes? I mean, it's not just the reverberations, because I mean, this is probably a big part of it, because the room is like the feeling of the place. Yeah. But I mean, also for the sound, maybe even for the music or something like that. Is there like an instrument maker that builds instruments from that time period to record them, or
Yeah, I mean, most of my work is really a combination of these more technical aspects, but to me, really another key consideration is understanding that sensorial experiences are context specific, and they're culturally determined. And I think we see very little awareness of this in the audio world, or the more technical side of the audio world. And to me, actually, that is really important, is understanding that we don't hear the same way than people did, for example, in medieval times. We can never truly recreate that experience. We can only try to do our best job to use the historical records to try to see how certain sonic experiences might have come together. But we hear in relation to our own context, and that is determined by the community we live in, but loads of different characteristics, including what we have access to and what we don't have access to. And that is the really important part of my work that goes beyond just acoustic measurements, but really explores those findings in relation to sensory history, but also sensory anthropology. And I definitely would like to see more of that in acoustical work, in historical acoustical work. A lot of what I do in my work is as well try to find creative ways to express that ambivalence. So I'm very much into transparency of presentation of results. So what I've done in the past to show this unknowns about spaces and this different sonic experiences is build an online interface called the Soundscapes of the York Mystery Plays. And what you can do in that interface is create your own soundscape from the past, but everything is based on really thorough research. But you can listen to what the change is if a performance setting was in this way or in this other way, if someone was sitting here or they were sitting in this other place. And this was very important for me because I wanted to show that I didn't know what the medieval drama of the mystery play sounded like. I can only present possibilities.
Yeah.
So the nice thing about the interface is you can also add sound effects that are likely to have been present in medieval York at the time. So, for example, we know there were pigs in the streets, and it's likely that they made sounds as they do now. I think that's a fair assumption.
Yeah.
So, of course, I didn't record medieval pigs, but I did record modern pigs, and people can add them to the soundscape and start thinking about that sonic experience. But I think that transparency about what the limits of the research is and the possibilities, I think that's actually really important.
Yeah, that's a very cool setting to have, and I've checked it out beforehand, and we will put it in the description. And it's I also really liked this aspect that you have this possibility, and you can build your own soundscape, and it's all like it probably sounded something like this, but yeah, you never know. And also depending on the day and depending on how they set it up that day.
Absolutely,
and if the pigs were there or not, of course. Yeah. So yeah, I really like that approach. That's a very interesting thing to have. I played around with it probably for an hour or something. So
that's good to know.
it was really fun. So I recommend it. Touching on the point of going out and recording pigs, what I always like to ask my guests is, why did you record your first sound ever, and what was it?
Oh, goodness. I've been thinking about this question, and I think it was when I was doing my master's in post-production with sound design at York. I think our first recording task was to do some kind of spot recordings. And for some reason, we recorded kind of very specific cars passing by. And I believe we used a shotgun mic. I don't know why we didn't do a stereo recording. I can't remember really the logic there. But it's worth noting that when I did my master's, I didn't actually have a background in sound recording or editing or mixing or sound technology at all. So everything was very new to me. My undergraduate was a degree in arts with specialization in music. So my initial background is more similar to musicology. So the study of music throughout history, but also the study of music from different disciplinary angles, including sociology, psychology, anthropology. So this was very new to me, so I'm not really sure I actually understood what I was doing when I did that recording, and I did do it with someone else that explained to me things like phantom power and levels, because I don't think I had understood that in the lecture. But as you know, a lot of recording is experimenting and not being afraid of the equipment. And I do remember being quite intimidated because everybody else in my class came from a more typical background for that sort of MA. So they had done audio engineering undergraduates, they had done sound for film and TV or film and TV as an undergraduate. Well, my background was so different to everybody else's. It was a really uphill learning curve really to catch up.
Yeah, I can imagine. But as you said, it's a lot about experimenting, and there's no bad recording. It's just maybe not fitting for the current situation, but you can always use a recording, no matter what it is, and even if you just use it to make something else. You mentioned also your background a bit in music and historical music instruments and stuff like that. So what would interest me is if you watch like movies and series, and do you recognize those errors? Like, they didn't have this kind of guitar back then, or this shouldn't sound like that. Do you have this nagging feeling in your head, like, they got it wrong this time?
No, not really. I don't specialize in musical instruments, so I wouldn't, probably many times I wouldn't even notice. My interest has always been in the medieval period, so it's quite a specialized field in its own way. So I used to play, when I was an undergraduate student, I got very much into medieval music. So I used to play in a medieval music ensemble, with the costumes and everything.
Awesome.
So I played the medieval Gothic harp. It's quite niche, really. So I guess if there was something very unusual in a medieval setting, I might notice it. But I'd say that if you're thinking about that, probably it means the film is not very engaging.
Yeah, you're probably right. I mean, I just asked that because recently I read this interesting article about like bird watchers getting really annoyed that there's this certain call that it's in all the films. It's like a certain type of bird, and all the bird watchers know that they are most of the time it's not the right country or not the right time of day or not the right setting, and everyone uses that because it's that like this ominous sound that everyone uses for making something mysterious. And it was an interesting long article about that. People get really upset about that because it's like it's not fitting, and it brings them out of the experience. So.
Oh, really interesting.
Yeah. I will also link that in the description and send it to you.
Oh, that's really interesting. I sometimes do have noticed that a lot of people use this stock environment effects, and sometimes I have found myself recognizing the recording, saying, I have heard that somewhere else.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like the Wilhelm Tell scream. I think even people without audio experience know by now. But yeah, we have all those little things where we like, I've heard that before a couple of times. This was this like generic library. Yeah, absolutely. That's also why I'd really like to go out for every project and record my own stuff, even if I have something in the library. Only I think for stuff that I can do myself, but everything else, at least I try to add something to it to make it stand out a bit, because this is really annoying me as well.
It just makes it unique, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like this time period and this like you do it this time for this project and you have your unique spin at that time on it. I think that's really important. Other arts do this as well. I mean, for example, designers have their influences that also change over time, so you can really see in their journey that also their designs change because of the time they made it. And that also brings me to my next question, which really interests me. What inspired you to specialize in the study of gender equality in the audio field?
I don't study gender equality in audio, though. I have campaigned for gender equality in the audio field, but it's not my research field. I mean, other people do research this, and I have supervised projects that have had this topic in mind. But most of the work I've done in the field is more raising awareness about problems of gender equality in the audio world and trying to see how we could move forward. So some of the things I tend to look into is representation at audio events. So who gets to speak? In what context are they speaking actually matter? And especially in relation to things that are invitations. So for example, the typical academic conferences where we have keynotes. I mean, who are the keynotes? And what are the problems of people never seeing themselves represented in prominent figures? The same things, there's been you probably have heard about this, people that online bring attention to what are called manels, so panels that have all men. And I think this is very important because you still see quite a lot of it. I go to events and, there's 5 men on stage talking about their audio experiences, and it sends a very strong message of what they feel the field is. And, it doesn't make them evil or, or anything. But I think we all have a responsibility that if we find ourselves in events or organizing them or being part of events that don't take an equal approach in all sorts of diversity and equality, not just gender. I think it's important to just say something to the organisers, raise awareness and push people to think a little bit more carefully as to why do they invite the people that they invite? Because sometimes we just invite people that we know, don't we? I think it happens to everyone. You say, well, I know that person, I've heard them speak, they're really good. And you don't stop to think, oh, actually, what about people that are underrepresented? They also have great things to do and great work. Just because one doesn't know them doesn't mean they don't they don't do excellent work and their work should be amplified. So my work is mostly about awareness and just making sure when I teach as well, if there's any terminology that people are using, students are using, that is things like sound guy or things like that, I do very gently correct them, and I try to create a sense where we're having, we're not stopping the whole class to have a conversation about that, but there's a pointing out of, it's better not to use this term because of this, and then we just move on. And the more people students hear their lecturers using more inclusive language, the more they're going to incorporate them to their language rather than using outdated terms. So I think that's really important as well.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, in my early career, I started as a programmer, and for me, it always was in my teens. It was like, okay, programmers are males because that's the only thing I see. And I just realized with time that probably it was that way because the representation wasn't there. I couldn't hear any talks from female programmers or from IT specialists. So fortunately, that changed in the last years, and I'm trying to also be aware of that. And by the way, I also like to use the term audio humans because we're all humans.
Oh, that's nice.
You beautiful audio humans. Yes, that's, I mean, this is, I think it's also sometimes a problem trying to get people to understand that they don't mean ill when they say, hey guys,
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
they're like, I thought it was like, gender neutral, but it's not really. I mean, it's used that way, but it's also, framing everything in a way where it's like, this is like the main thing. And
Yeah, and I think, as you say, it's not about saying, oh, I can't believe you said that, but saying, oh, you know what, you might want to consider using another phrase.
Yeah.
And I think, when people start incorporating it when they're quite early in their career, it's actually easier. And I've always tried, when people have asked me questions, I have always tried to kind of explain things clearly and never, shut down any question or anything, because we want people to get on board diversity and equality. And we always have, I mean, I'm constantly questioning myself, and I have learned from other people, how our terminology kind of can impact different people, and how we always can. I think we can always improve ourselves, I guess.
Absolutely. I think it's true for every wake of life. I mean, for everything you have. That's like the thing that we as humans probably have inherent, that we constantly are learning, and there's no end.
And I might steal audio humans.
Yeah, of course. I love it. Humans is absolutely inclusive. Not for aliens yet, but I think...
Not for the pigs in my project, then.
Yeah, but they are not audio humans, right?
No.
They are the actors.
That's true.
Yeah, so what I also saw on your website was that you did sound design for the VR experience Monoliths.
Yeah.
And I would really like to know what your role was there, and what the challenges were that are like unique to VR sound design. Because, as we all know, VR is very dynamic, so you can move your head around. So stereo recordings are not really a thing, probably.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you asked that. It was a great experience, actually. This was a VR piece for the theatre company Pilot Theatre, based in York. And it was my first VR experience. And you should know that, ironically, I don't actually use VR very much, because a lot of experiences make me a bit dizzy. This one, and it was quite funny, because when we started the project, that's what I told the team. I said, if it passes the test of my experience, it's going to go great. And I can confirm it is very, very well designed, so I can experience it with no problems whatsoever. So Monolith is 3 poems by 3 women, and they're on their connection to the north. And each poem is linked to a different part of the north of England. And one of them is linked to the moors. Another one is linked to kind of the seaside, more specifically Scarborough. And another one is more related to city experiences, for which we focused on Bradford. So my job was actually providing the sound context for the experience. And we decided very early on, as we were talking before, about that uniqueness. We didn't want to use a library. We wanted to have a recording that was created specifically for that project, to represent each of the sites. And for that, exactly because of what you were saying, we need that kind of we really need kind of 3D audio. Stereo doesn't really suit the VR environment too well. So I use the Sennheiser Amvio microphone to do the recordings. The good thing about that microphone, it was my first time I used it more widely. That means like for an actual project rather than just tests. And I chose it because it's really portable. And for example, when I did the Moor recordings, there is a car park, but to get to a quiet spot, you have about 13-minute walk. And you know what it's like to walk around carrying all equipment. And I did have someone helping me carry some of it, but it does get quite exhausting. So we had to look into portability, actually. In things like the seaside and the city, that's not much of a problem, because you can park quite nearby and you're okay. So I did recordings from each of the sites, and it was really fascinating to see how different space was a slightly different recording strategy. And the Moor recording was very interesting to me, because the thing about the Moors is that they're quiet. So you're trying to capture that sense of tranquility. But a lot of that sense of tranquility is because there's not many sounds. And I'm sure you'll sympathize, it's very difficult to record something that's very quiet. So the first thing with that is just I had to do the recording twice, really, because the first time it didn't work out very well. There was too many people in the area. So a little bit, as we were talking about with imposed responses, is getting to know the space and what might be the best moment for it. So I think I ended up on a Saturday, like at 7:30 in the morning or something of the sort, where there were not many passers-by and you could just hear the birds, the winds. There was Highland cows as well. It seems like I'm obsessed with recording cows. Cows and pigs, animals in general. And, you know, they were the loudest thing in the environment, really. And they just made sounds every now and then. And yeah, it was about sitting there for as long as possible and knowing that even if it was going to be a 3-minute edit, it was better to have 30 minutes or so to then choose from it. But definitely, you know, noise removal was something that I had to do anyway, because I had to push the preamps quite high to be able to get any levels whatsoever that I could work with. And of course, you know, like apparently people on Saturday mornings shoot clay pigeons in the middle of the country. I mean, I didn't know people even did that. I'm like, I don't know why you would do that, but I guess I learned that as well while I was there.
Awesome. So you got a nice recording of shooting clay pigeons.
Yes, I do. Yeah,
that's great. Maybe you can use it for something else.
Yes.
Oh yeah, but I can share the pain of having something that's really serene, and you're like, oh, this is a nice quiet place, and you try to record it, and you say, how do I record the quiet? I mean, it's essentially more or less just the room tone, but as you said, you pick then out the little things that come from time to time, like the animals, birds is also always a fun thing, and what I really like is those quiet places with a small brook, or even like a river that's really slow moving, because that has like this quietness, but it's also not quiet. So, but it's really hard to do that.
Yeah. And there was a really nice moment in one of the recordings that, you know, only I know what it is, because if you listen to it, you would not know what's happening. But there's a little pond, and this Highland cows seem to like to go to kind of refresh themselves on their feet into the water. So there's a moment of the recording that you can actually hear the cow going into the water and then coming out. And it's a really beautiful moment. But when I talked to the producer and I explained what it was, I did tell her, look, I'm going to edit that out because it's not going to make any sense to anyone in the VR experience. Only I know that's the cow.
Yeah, you would have to model the cow and make an animation.
Kind of the interesting thing is that with how we worked with VR, actually we added a cow to... We added the VR, the visuals and the implementation was done by a one-to-one development trust. And actually we did they added a cow to their visuals because I said, I really want my cow sound.
Great.
In the edit, I really, you know, it sounds lovely. It gives a lovely texture and a moment of really quiet with another natural sound coming through. So we all agreed, you know, the cow was there to stay. So yes, there was a lot of conversations about adding the visuals, adding the cow to the visuals. So I'm pleased to tell you that there is a cow in the VR experience, both sonically and visually.
Yeah, that's very great. It's always good if you can inform some design decisions with sound as well. And what I also read on your website, what really interests me is this project that was called Enhancing Audio Description, number 2, but I think it's number 1 as well. But would like to hear more about that. What exactly is it, and how does it impact visually impaired audiences?
Yes, of course. So a big part of the work I do in sound is work on sound design for accessibility, and more specifically I work on accessibility to film and television for visually impaired audiences. And Enhancing Audio Description is a project that is funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council in the UK, and it's based at the University of York, and it explores alternatives to audio description to film and television. So audio description is that third person commentary that is added to film or TV production, explaining generally the visual layer of the production, but sometimes also some elements that are sound elements. And it is there to make it accessible to visually impaired people. It is a process that sits outside the creative and technical workflows of film and television production. And it means that once a production is finished, it gets sent to an audio description company to provide audio description. And what the Enhancing Audio Description project does is investigate alternatives. So our work is on a new paradigm for accessibility, one that challenges that over-reliance on the voice, on words, on explanations as the only way for accessibility. And we instead combine voice with sound effects and audio spatialization to provide accessible experiences. And what we do is we actually work with productions. So our methods are not accessibility methods that are tagged at the end of a production just to comply, as many people think about accessibility, sadly. We actually work with it with the filmmakers, with the television makers. And our methods really are a combination of three things. One of them is sound effects, another is binaural audio, and another is a first-person description. So I'll just take you through each of them just so that it makes a little bit more sense.
Yeah.
So by sound effects, I mean adding sound effects or rebalancing the levels of sound effects to provide information for visually impaired audiences. So just to give you an example, a few years ago, we worked on a short film that towards the end of the film has a really beautiful scene in which the main character is running really dramatically towards the shore. She's being chased by her mother and her doctor. And in the original film, we only have the music score. Of course, we have the visuals, beautiful cinematography, and we have the music score. Of course, when we tested this scene with visually impaired people said they weren't sure what was happening because there was no sound effects. There was nothing to tell you what was going on.
Yeah.
And as you know, music can mean different things to different people.
Of course, yeah.
So the first thing that we did is we brought back the sound effects. So in our version, we can hear the characters running along the shore, and we can also hear aspects of ambience. So we can hear the seagulls, we can hear the waves, we can hear the winds, and we can hear her breathing. And that is really important because when you're not seeing the screen, breathing can, for example, tell you someone is still there, but also it can give you a lot of emotional information. So that is an example of how we use sound effects. In terms of binaural audio, how does this connect to accessibility? Well, it allows us to provide information on where people are and where things are. So as most people listening, or many people listening, will know, in film and television, we pan dialogue to the center. And this comes from a belief that there needs to be a really strong tie to the visuals. However, this is not very useful for accessibility because it doesn't tell people, everything's coming from the same place. So it doesn't tell people where characters are. And this can be quite confusing. And it can be really confusing if the voices sound similar. So what we do is we break the conventions. We actually pan the dialogue, and we pan the dialogue to match the position of the character on screen. It helps us set the scene, but we also have found that it's really effective to differentiate voices more clearly. But also by panning sound effects more effectively, you can set the scene. You can tell people, there's a fireplace crackling at the front of the room. There is a door opening on the right surround. There is someone pouring a drink on the left surround, etc. So you don't need to describe those things with words because they are sonically already there. So this is another part of what we do. The third thing that we do is look into short first-person descriptions, kind of a little bit like inner monologues, to help clarify things that we believe are not really possible to do effectively with sound effects and spatial audio. So, for example, it could be that a color is particularly meaningful, or something has happened that is not really what you would expect. So you want to provide context to that. And these are by the main character, or we're exploring whether sometimes you would like to change first person throughout a production. And these three things combined is what we call enhanced audio description, or EAD. And again, they're designed to be incorporated to the production of a film or a TV, and hopefully become in the future as important as other parts of the design process.
That's very interesting. Yeah, so it's almost like you're making the movie into like an audio drama or like an audio story.
Yes and
Somewhat,
no.
right? Yeah.
Yes. I mean, this is something that we get asked quite a lot. We always work with what is already there, which means we sometimes have in the past been told, oh, this sounds like a radio drama, which is quite interesting to us because we don't actually change what the film sounds like in any way that would compromise the style of the design. But generally, I think that people come to that conclusion because it is so integrated that accessibility, we just finished working on a film that if I played it to you, you wouldn't be able to tell what is accessibility and what is in the original film. It is quite impossible to tell. And that's, of course, that's what we consider a sign of success, when something is so integrated that it is really seamless. And again, moving away from that third person that comes in, gives you an explanation, goes away, comes in again. And I think because it's so integrated, some people kind of think about it in relation to radio drama and other audio-only formats. But we still wanted to film feel like someone is having a cinematic experience or a television experience.
Yeah, like something in between. Then that's
yes.
Very interesting. Yeah, that's also that was also my thought. I mean, I haven't listened to a lot of audio dramas. The only thing I can like instantly recall, because it was very, very impressive to me, was Homecoming. I don't know if you've heard of that, but
no,
I will also link that. It was like a bigger production. And it essentially also used a lot of like panning and also like low quality sounds when someone was on the phone, so you could actually hear. It was like you had this phone pressed on your ear. It was very intense, and like, or a loud bubbling water tank in the room or something like that. So you could really feel the room, and it was not clean at all, but very, very rough and real. Yeah. And that impressed me a lot. And and I also that is something that personally I also don't like in a lot of movies where the dialogue is very centered most of the time. Only maybe for some effect shots or something when a character flies somewhere. But that's something that always irks me, and I hope this gets adopted more often. And it's also great that it's also then making it more accessible.
Yeah, I mean we've also done evaluation sessions in the past, and because a lot of filmmakers have this fear that this panning the dialogue is not going to be accepted by audiences. But we have run tests with mixed visually impaired and sighted audiences. And sighted audiences were fine with the panned dialogue. They didn't really mind. Yeah. They actually, many people said they liked it. So I've often wondered how much is kind of a preconception of what audiences will accept and not accept, rather than a reality of what people are likely to feel. I mean, there's some issues with panning dialogue in relation to noise, and whether something has noise, then you're just panning the noise,
of course,
and just making it more obvious. So there's some challenges, but definitely, as you say, a lot of opportunities. I think a lot of sighted audiences feel that centered dialogue is, as you say, is an issue.
Yeah, and connecting on that whole issue, how do you see the future of sound design and accessibility evolving in the field of less linear mediums like video games or interactive media?
I think there's a slight gain, or gradual gain of momentum, of this idea of accessibility as an integrated method rather than this add-on. But I do feel that there's a lot of work to be done in people actually taking accessibility seriously. I think many kind of interactive media designers or game designers are still not at the point where they're even thinking about disability and accessibility, or at least that's the impression I get, is kind of not at the stage where I get the impression that people are sitting down to design their experiences already thinking about accessibility. And if you want to integrate it, that's the only way of doing it. You have to think about it. The earlier, the better. I think I would personally like to see more integration of the topic in education. I think that's the real problem. I think professionals are coming from educations in universities or other places in which accessibility is not even included in filmmaking degrees or video gaming related degrees or interactive media, etc. And what happens is that reinforces this notion that it doesn't matter, that it is something that's not the problem of designers. Whereas if we started teaching students that actually, no, accessibility is just as important as, the visual effects and the programming and this and that, I think they would go then to become professionals that have that notion of integrated access and that want to make their experiences accessible. So I think the educational sector has a lot of work that they could be doing and they should be doing to stop reproducing these ways of working that end up in inaccessible experiences, and instead start training generations of professionals that truly engage with equality, diversity, and access.
Yeah, that's something where I can totally agree, because if you have that mindset, then it influences your decisions. I just remember that the first time I really thought about accessibility in some projects was during my apprenticeship when I learned programming, and we had this program where we had this traffic light signal where it's like, if it's red, it's like you have to do something. If it's yellow, it's fine, and stuff like that. And we presented it to the bosses, and then one of the bosses said, yeah, that's fine, but I actually can't see color. And I was like, well, that doesn't help at all. And then we had this whole talk about what kind of problems he had in different kind of situations. And I was like, the traffic light only works if the whole traffic light is there, because he can see which one of the lights is on, so the color doesn't matter. And that was something where I was really stumped with, I had thought about that at all. And I didn't know that, because there was no, it's not like you talk about your disability every day. And especially back in the day, it was people usually were very close with that, because they were afraid probably of not getting a job or anything. Fortunately, that changed, and especially in Germany, that's I think it's in a good spot already, but it's also room for improvement. But this accessibility, that is something that I've thought about a lot, and I came to the conclusion that it would be very interesting to have some kind of games that, for example, worked for visually impaired and not visually impaired people alike. I can imagine something like VR being great for that, because you can really go with the sound and with distance attenuation, and can just trust your senses, so to say. That could be interesting, but I've not seen anything interesting yet in that regard. So if any one of my listeners has something, please send it my way so I can signal boost it. We've been talking almost an hour now, so I'm all out of questions. So there is only one thing left. So do you want to shout out anything, any project, any person? Feel free to shout anything.
Yeah, so there's a few people really, and it's such a fear that you're going to forget someone.
Of course.
In the field of acoustical heritage, I would definitely highlight the work of two great colleagues of mine and friends of mine. One is Dr. Lidia Alvarez Morales, who led a project on cathedral acoustics in the UK and is a wonderful researcher and expert in the study of cathedrals around Europe, really. And also Dr. Covey van Tonder has done a lot of work on a project called Acoustic Atlas. And this project, you should definitely check it out online. You can actually go to different sites and record yourselves on those sites, so you can speak into all sorts of buildings and natural spaces, and then also download your own recording for creative purposes if you'd like. And she has also released an album based on composers using those spaces creatively quite recently, and that's freely available online. So definitely check out Covey's work. And both those projects were funded by the European Commission. But also, I've been really lucky throughout the years of having great research mentorship in my colleague, Professor Damien Murphy. And again, he's done a lot of work on acoustical heritage. But also in terms of our enhanced audio description work, I'm really lucky to work with the best of teams. The co-investigator of the project is Professor Gavin Carney, but we also work with postdoctoral researchers Dr. Christian Hofstadter and Dr. Michael McLaughlin, and we have an amazing project officer that is Shaima Alouan. And oh goodness, there's so many people, but the last one, just to highlight as well, if you're interested in accessibility, is at York. We're hosting a wonderful visiting fellow called Dr. Monica Savroca, and she's working, for example, on accessibility for visually impaired children, which is a very specific, very interesting field. And I do also have the joy to work with a number of wonderful doctoral researchers as well. But I think that's it.
Yeah, thank you so much. We will put all those things in the description as well, because
that's fine.
Okay, so again, thank you for taking the time. It was very interesting to learn about those new audio areas I had no idea about, and I will certainly go deeper into a rabbit hole with those probably.